Studio Brûlé. This is Steve Brûlé, and it's coffee time. And today, Monday, March 31st. The last week we saw, in the last week or two, we've been seeing the increasing pressure upon China and the origins, search for the origins of the coronavirus. So this is something we talked about very, very early in the pandemic at Studio Brûlé. And so I think it's worth going over this because this, what we have talked about in the very beginning is now what is being allowed out again. What has changed since the beginning of the pandemic to now? Well, they've sold billions upon billions of dollars of vaccines. We've minted new billionaires in the world, and the global corporations of the world have more than doubled and sometimes tripled their profits. Also, they succeeded in getting Trump out of power. Now that those two things are secured and guaranteed, the truth is allowed to come out. So, hello to Unified Behavioral Theory and Ryan R. Welcome to the show. Let's get right into it. First thing I do want to do is go over some of the things that we talked about early in the pandemic. This that you're seeing on the screen right here is from April 6th, 2020, just 11 months ago almost. And this is from Business Insider. And on a science topic. Sorry about the slight miss up here. Reading from the top with me on the title, this is Business Insider magazine. A potential coronavirus vaccine funded by Bill Gates is set to begin testing in people, with the first patient expected to get it today. That's April 6th. If you remember right, that's only like 1 month after the start of the pandemic, and they already had a vaccine in testing from Bill Gates. Bill Gates, who famously supported and lobbied for lockdowns to the tune of over $500 million to lobby for lockdowns, and including not allowing the world to open up until everyone was vaccinated. And they had a vaccine pretty much sitting in their back pocket waiting to go. I'm going to try and go through this history a little bit fast because there's so much to talk about on what's going on in terms of reopening investigations into these origins of the coronavirus, and who and why would the elite, those in power, those who control the media and the governments, why would they actively suppress investigation into the origins for over a year now? Let's read on a bit. In the Inovio Pharmaceuticals, that was the one from Bill and Melinda Gates funded for looking for the vaccine. I'm going to skip this very fast. Here in the College Fix said the epidemiologist, coronavirus could be exterminated if lockdowns were lifted. So here we have Bill Gates, again, lobbying for lockdowns to the tune of over $500 million, standing to profit from vaccines and indicating that lockdowns and the economy can't get back to normal until everybody's vaccinated. And what did epidemiologists say at the very same time? That we could exterminate this coronavirus if we lifted the lockdowns. And I talked about this. This is April 7th, 2020. Last April, 11 months ago, roughly. A little over 11 months ago, actually. What am I talking about? This is the end of May. It's almost June now. We talked about this on the coffee sessions, that we should be allowing those in the young, healthy groups to go on with their lives and get exposed and become immune while we protected the elderly. Let's say review what we talked about that time. This fellow, epidemiology researcher at Rockefeller University, New York City, said in an interview, the coronavirus could be exterminated if we permitted most people to lead normal lives and sheltered the most vulnerable parts of society until the danger had passed. Well-known, well-understood epidemiology that we talked about and was in the news in the beginning. And yet, did they win the day? No, they did not. The very important question is, why did these people with very reasonable and known solutions not win the day and not get the coverage they should have got? Could it have something to do with billions upon billions of dollars to be made selling vaccines? You know it. Reading from the top. With all respiratory diseases, the only thing that stops disease is herd immunity. About 80% of the people need to have contact with the virus, and the majority of them won't even have recognized that they were infected, or they had very, very mild symptoms, especially if they are children. Remember, this is over a year ago. Reading from the top. It's very important to keep the schools open and kids mingling to spread the virus to get herd immunity as fast as possible. And then the elderly people should be separated and nursing homes should be closed during that time. Come back and meet their children and grandchildren after about 4 weeks when the virus has been exterminated. We could have had this virus exterminated at the most 6 weeks or 8 weeks in to be safe, if we had just used the common sense advice of expert epidemiologists, and it's advice that the overwhelming majority of us can fully understand and fully support, and yet it did not win the day. Who won the day? The goals of the elite, which was to lock down the economy and not allow it to open until everybody is vaccinated. And who profited from that? We talked about this in one of the recent coffee sessions. There was about 9 new billionaires, and the existing companies also vastly increased their wealth. Regular people lost $3.7 or $3.5 trillion in the last year, and the super elite, the super ultra wealthy, gained $3.7 or $3.9 trillion over that same time period. This was about money. This was not a pandemic needing a lockdown in any shape or form. The coronavirus says Bill Gates calls for 10 more weeks of lockdown. That was April 3rd. Bill Gates lobbied for lockdowns all the way through this. And him and his buddies are all in the biotech vaccination business. I'm not even going to read over this because he knew damn well what he was doing. Bill Gates, everybody talks about Bill Gates as being one of the smartest people in the world. And he was smart in the sense that he multiplied his wealth and his buddy's wealth and his power. But we, the people, had no say in the matter. I'm going to remind you that these lockdowns did not require any justification. They did not have to make a case for it. They just implemented it. They implemented it because of the lobbying of the elite, because our leaders, our political leaders, are in the pockets of the elite. Let's read on. Anthony Fauci, the chief infectious disease expert leading the U.S. response, echoed Gates' claim and said he doesn't understand why states aren't working together to tackle the virus. Fauci knew he was lying. There's no two ways about it. Fauci, who funded the Wuhan lab and the research into the gain of function that was this virus, that's looking like the most likely candidate for the source of this virus right now. And we talked about this over a year ago. Fauci looked at all the media people who are their friends, lied to them, and they ran with it. Fauci knew darn well we should not be locking down. Business Standard. We cannot run away to the moon. We need to develop herd immunity. Epidemiologists. This is April 6, 2020. And I'm just going to flip through this. This is all about the need to develop herd immunity, which we didn't need a vaccine for, would have developed perfectly naturally. And the coronavirus, by the way, was the perfect candidate for allowing natural immunity to develop, because the people who were most at risk, the elderly and the infirm, were already segregated 80% from society. They were all easy to protect because they were generally in long-term care homes and hospitals and etc. And there were a small group of people who don't generally work, so they don't contribute to the economy. Small number of people who do contribute to the economy could have been protected as well. And the rest of the people, including children in the working class and the working age groups, should have been left to continue on developing herd immunity and keeping the economy healthy. But no, that does not build the bank accounts of the super elite, and it does not push their power in the world forward. That was the real goal. Here from Business Insider, the WHO says there is no need for healthy people to wear face masks days after the CDC told all Americans to cover their faces. This shows that they're struggling to keep their narrative in line with each other. The one thing they had in common was trying to drive up fear as much as possible and keep people from and lock down the economies and drive people to demand the vaccine so that the super-duper wealthy got super-duper wealthier. Fauci says we're not going back to normal without a vaccine or treatment. That was April 7th, 2020. 11 months ago, or rather I should say 13 months ago almost, 14 months ago almost. I'm going to get my date calculation straight one day or another. Fauci was playing the role of selling the pandemic lockdown plans to the public. That was his role in this. Not as chief health or pandemic manager, yes, but not for managing it for our benefit, managing it for the benefit of his bosses like every other good employee is doing for their company. He works for somebody and he's doing their bidding and not in our best interest. Here he is. Here's what happened in the early days. This is March 27th, folks. Somebody knew what was going on here. Somebody knew the lockdowns were coming. Somebody knew the impact it was going to have on the stock markets. And we talked about this at this very time, March 27th. Billionaire investment denies sounding the coronavirus alarm to tank markets and rake in $2.6 billion. This guy 100 times his wealth in a matter of weeks by insider information about what's going to be the response to the coronavirus. Billionaire here, he dismisses the accusations. Of course he does. Of course he does. They always dismiss. Who's going to come and say, do you really expect this guy to come and say, I knew it would crash the markets and I would 100 times my wealth as a result of it. That's why I did it. Good Jesus, Lord, people, wake up. There are no elite here out after our best interests. They're after their own interests, and we should expect that. We should not be surprised at that. But we should be acting to protect ourselves and our interests, and they are not. They are against our interests. Senators sold stocks before the coronavirus tanked the markets. There was 2 or 4 or something like that, a small number of senators who sold all their stocks before the market tanked after the announcements. They knew what was coming, insider information. They took advantage of this. They're not protecting us, folks. They're protecting their own power and profits. And here's some more details. You can read this later. I don't need to read all of this stuff. Here, this one here, bonanza for rich real estate investors tucked into the stimulus package. This is way back in March 26. There was already a stimulus package in March 26 to the tune of $2 trillion. And what was in it? The same old, padding the money, your money, off to already ultra-rich people, because those people in government work for those ultra-rich people. They don't work for us anymore. The Western democracy world has really tanked. We don't have a representative democracy. The only interest that the governments serve today is the rich, the super rich. It's out of control. Of course, it's never been a perfect past. There was never a perfect past to Western democracy in the past. It's always been riddled with corruption. The difference is today, we're not even looking at the corruption. They have become so powerful at hiding their corruption, at taking advantage of every frickin' thing that comes along, that they are just they're robbing us left, right, and center, and sticking us in a prison of our own homes to boot. Let's read on. The Senate Republicans slipped a tax break for wealthy real estate investors into the $2 trillion coronavirus package. Don't be surprised that Republicans do that. There's just as many corrupt people in the Republican Party as there are in the Democrat Party. The difference is really that Democrats want socialism and Republicans don't. Republicans want a capitalist society. And in the balance of lesser of evils, we're better to avoid socialism as much as possible. That was in March 27th, that article. Here, China imposes restrictions into research into the origins of the coronavirus. This, again, was over a year ago, this headline. More herd immunity, less herd mentality. This was urged in April 8th. Lots of people were speaking out, but their voices were crushed. They were crushed by the likes of Facebook and Google search engines. And they were crushed by the likes of Twitter. And they were crushed by the likes of the Government of Canada in creating laws to make it illegal to go against government-issued official narratives. I'm not going to read through this here because you know the story, and if you want to see this comment later, just to pause at this point in the video. And this was written by a doctor who was a professor of medicine at Columbia University Medical Center, urging for herd immunity. Natural herd immunity would have developed, and quickly. This virus, the profile of this virus and the populations that it infects, was a perfect candidate for developing herd immunity with minimal losses. By protecting the sick and the elderly with all you have, and letting all the healthy, unaffected people who aren't at risk carry on with their lives as per normal, mix it up as much as possible, get immune, and then the virus has nowhere to go. It dies a natural death. It goes extinct. That's what it does. It goes extinct because there's no more carriers to infect. And with a 99.997 survival rate in that population, that was the way to go. That was not a secret. People were talking about that. And as we're going to see later on in some of the news articles, that there was famous, well-connected, well-respected epidemiologists and biologists encouraging this very thing, as we talked about over a year ago. The difference was Trump was in an election phase, and they hated Trump, and Trump was urging for cures like the hydroxychloroquine and other things, and trying to get, anyways, you know the story. Anthony Fauci sets stage for lucrative mandatory vaccines. Him and his friend Bill Gates, amongst others. These are just two of the most high-profile people. There's a whole army of smaller people who never reach the news, some of whom became new billionaires last year, 9 of whom that we talked about. Their wealth have dramatically increased. And you think they're going to talk? They're not going to talk. These people have so much money and so much control over the left-wing media that this will all be swept under the rug. There's criminal behavior here that should result in charges, but it'll never see the light of day because the courts are as much in the pocket of the elites as is the media. Let's read from the top here. What great news for Bill Gates, who just announced his foundation is going to spend billions of dollars to help build factories for 7 possible coronavirus vaccine makers. Guess who's making the profits? Spend is probably the wrong word here. Invest is more like it. And other people have done investigations into Bill Gates' so-called charity foundation. It has nothing to do with charity. It's a tax haven. Bill Gates controls all of it, him and his wife. Charity? Sure. Bill Gates. You believe Bill Gates is into charity. And really, I don't even know what to say to you if you believe that. Reading on evidence for Wuhan lab as true COVID culprit is growing. When was this? April 16th, 2020. These are all screen caps that I captured at this time over a year ago. The evidence was growing, but it was crushed. Who crushed it? Who has a motive to crush that the truth, that the evidence of the Wuhan lab as the source? The same people who want a lockdown, who are friends with China, who lobbied to have Tedros from Ethiopia made the leader of the World Health Organization. Bill Gates, they're all buddies. We talked about this in those sessions at that time. I'm not going to read this here, but if you want to go back and read some of this stuff, Dr. Fauci here in this headline backed controversial Wuhan lab with millions of US dollars for risky coronavirus research. Read the date here, April 28th, 2020, over a year ago. And for the intervening time up until very recently, after the vaccine manufacturers have their billions of dollars of profit, after they successfully got Trump out of power, they're going back to this inevitable, obvious possibility of the release. This is the biggest candidate, the strongest candidate. And the media and the politicians did everything in their power to suppress this for over a year. Why? As usual, the answer comes from following the money. This is an old expression. It's an old expression that has endured for a long time for a reason. Follow the money. Because it works. It leads to this answer to why this happened. Profit. Profit is power. Profit is control of the world. Last year, the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the organization led by Dr. Fauci, funded scientists at the Wuhan Institute of Virology and other institutions for work of gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses. We talked about this. This is from that article from over a year ago. Anthony Fauci sets stage for... Oh, we already talked about that one. I must have duplicated that. I'll just skip forward a little bit. Government switched from, this is May 7th, 2020. You remember the 2 weeks to flatten the curve? Well, that was the beginning of March. That should have been over before the end of March. This is not April, this is May in this article. This is 2 months after the 2 weeks for flattening the curve. Governments switched from flatten the curve to lockdown until vaccine. And who was lobbying for that switch? Who lobbied for flatten the curve and lockdowns in the first place? Bill Gates and his friends, to hundreds of millions of dollars. And who lobbied to switch from flatten the curve to lockdown until the entire world is vaccinated with our vaccines? Bill Gates and his crowds. And lo and behold, after the vaccine companies, they've already got all their contracts. They haven't sold all their vaccines yet. They're still producing, but they have locked deal on contracts to sell billions of doses of vaccines, many of which have already been sold and injected. Now that their profit has been had, they're not concerned about protecting China anymore. And they're part of and they've got Trump out of power. The narrative switched to something new. Yep. And you can read this later if you like. There also includes COVID passports. We saw them trying to put that in, but jurisdictions around the world are some of them are finding that the people are just not going to accept it, including the UK. I read this morning. They have abandoned the vaccine passport idea. So has Israel, who had the highest vaccination rate in the world at 90% or something like that, and they had a vaccine passport required for everything. They have abandoned the idea too. These are good signs. These are signs that the people are, at least their eyes are a little bit open to the corrupt possibilities of a vaccine passport or any kind of passport that restricts your entry and access to the things you need to survive in our society. Here, this fellow here, John Geisig, in the Lancet wrote, lockdowns don't really reduce overall total deaths. And then when it's all over, non-lockdown jurisdictions are likely to have similar death rates as lockdown areas. This is over a year ago. This is exactly what we're seeing. And this guy isn't particularly a genius, okay, for saying this. This doesn't mean that this guy was somehow able to see what other people weren't able to see. Every last competent epidemiologist should have seen the same thing. Even non-epidemiology specialists like myself saw that, and like all of you understood this. And like we're seeing in Texas and Florida, in Sweden we saw the same thing. They're having the same death rates as every other one, no matter how much lockdown, the strictest lockdowns you can make are. Coronavirus and BBC. Is the pandemic being used for a power grab in the world, in Europe? Not just Europe, the whole world. The super elite wealthy of the world have so much power that they were able to lock down the entire world. Think about that. This was holding the whole world at ransom. We were all kidnapped in our own homes. Our businesses destroyed, our incomes taken away. This is crime. This is criminal. They knew what they were doing. They knew it wasn't necessary. But they were able to get the government officials, tell you this is where the peasants should rise up. As ever there's been a legitimate reason in history for peasants to rise up against governments, it's now. These government officials did the bidding of these wealthy elite and held us all at ransom for over a year until we all injected an unknown substance in our bodies, and they got paid for it. They got paid so much for it. This is the biggest crime in human history that we've seen in this past year. Unquestionably. That the media run by the wealthy had to whip up mass hysteria to do it doesn't matter. Just because some of us got caught up in mass hysteria, I did not, but some of us, and I know most of my viewers did not, but an awful lot of people, and you see them on the streets, and they're in your family, and they're among your friends, people who are terrified of this pandemic. They're terrified for one reason. They've been lied to through their teeth by people with an ulterior motive for getting us to believe their story. And that's to get filthy, filthy, filthy rich, even though they already control the overwhelming majority of the world. Let's read on. Daily Signal, leading CEO on coronavirus recovery panel, wary of government power grab. We saw governments around the world using this as an excuse to enact emergency powers. Was there even a study? Trudeau didn't do a study, he just enacted them. None of the governments did a study to determine whether this was needed or warranted. They just did it. They did it. Why? Because they're masters, they're puppet masters, they're people who are lining their pockets with green every day, told them to. Let's read on. Again, this is over a year ago. For autocrats and others, coronavirus is a chance to grab even more power, and they sure did. Remember, this is over a year ago, these headlines. Leaders around the world have passed emergency decrees and legislation expanding their reach during the pandemic. Will they ever relinquish them? That's a very good question. It's a very good question. There was an old quote that if we allow governments to take emergency powers during a crisis, they will find a crisis every single day to justify maintaining those emergency powers, keeping them. We've been warned against this over and over again, not just through true history, but even through narrative stories and science fiction novels. These are the real dynamics of human nature and human groups in powerful structures. They want power, they want more power, and then they want even more power. Now, jumping forward to recent events, May 26, 2021, Facebook, one of the most censorious organizations in our culture, who crushed or deleted or put warnings over anything suggesting that any criticism of official government line was a conspiracy theory. This was at Facebook for the entire thing. And what do they do now? They're embarrassed. They're trying to escape. Criticism. So they lift the ban on posts questioning the origin of COVID-19. There was never a legitimate reason to put a ban on questioning the origin of COVID-19. Never. And we're going to go over some evidence of that. Let's read on. PM Media. Facebook has said in February that in addition to other misleading health claims, that social media platform would not tolerate on its site the concept that COVID-19 is man-made or manufactured, and would also be disallowed in discourse. They had to quickly change their tune, because finally the voices of some scientists, real scientists that don't just throw out stuff that doesn't fit their narrative. We're talking real scientists are getting their voices heard again about the real origins of this vaccine, or rather this coronavirus. On Wednesday, Facebook made an about-face saying that, quote, in light of ongoing investigations into the origin of COVID-19 and in consultation with public health experts, what crap. This is damage control, nothing less than damage control. We will no longer remove the claim that COVID-19 is man-made from our apps. We're continuing to work with health experts. There's your mistake right there. You don't need to work with anybody for freedom of speech. This is how ideas form. This is how science works. All ideas must be pursued and stand or fall on their own merits, not by consulting, working with, quote, health experts. Fauci is a health expert. Bill Gates is considered a health expert. They've all lied through their teeth at us. The World Health Organization with Tedros is considered a health expert. They lied through their teeth at us. Every one of the health experts working for the Western worlds are lying through their teeth at us. They are telling us what the government tells them to tell us. And then Facebook says we're working with health experts? What a pile of steaming crap. To keep pace with the evolving nature of the pandemic and regularly update our policies as new facts and trends emerge. What a steaming pile of crap. This is damage control. All of this information was available exactly the way it is today, a year ago, at the very beginning of this coronavirus. This information. This is not new information. What's new is that they can't contain it anymore. What's new is that the super wealthy have made most of their money already, and the contracts are signed, sealed, and delivered. Governments can't get out of these vaccine contracts anymore. Your money has been spent. You've been locked down. Your businesses have already been destroyed. Trump has been thrown out for no reason. They've succeeded. So now they're doing damage control, and they're going to try to spin the narrative back into themselves as the guardians of all that is true and right. Don't buy it. Facebook is the sleaziest organization that will ever be created within, well, I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say will ever, because these oligarchs, these power mongers and greedy monsters like Zuckerberg are always finding new and innovative ways, evil ways, to be sleazy and more power-mongering. So I wouldn't say this is the pinnacle yet. I think we have more to go before we're going to reach the pinnacle of sleaze in Western culture. Let's read on. This move comes after the Wall Street Journal reported that scientists at the Wuhan Institute for Virology came down with COVID-like symptoms in November 2019. Folks, I don't know if you remember, but I remember and I think we talked about this, I can't swear about it, we might have mentioned it in passing, but there was already talk of cases in November in a year and 2 months ago. There was talk. I don't remember it ever getting to the point of front page news, but there were people saying, reading and commenting on cases, unknown cases surfacing in China. This is not new. What's new is that it's coming out in a major journal like the Wall Street Journal. The Wall Street Journal, I'd have to say, is why did they wait a year and 2 months to release this information? Ask yourself that. Why did the Wall Street Journal just start coming out with this information now when I heard about it a year and 2 months ago in some small little discussion groups? If anybody has a link to from a year or 2 years ago about the early cases in November, I can't find it in my stuff right now, but I've got a pile of stuff here I have to sort through. But if you can find it, please post it in the comments. But this is reading onwards here in the Wall Street Journal. This revelation has given further credence to the theory that the virus was modified in the lab using gain-of-function research to enhance its contagious properties to allow for greater study. I just posted those links from last April and last March on this very show, at the beginning of this very show. And the Wall Street Journal, they're calling this a revelation after the profit from the vaccines is made, after Trump is out of power, after they've successfully destroyed a huge number of small businesses, forcing those workers to go in and take government or big business jobs? No, this is no revelation. This is damage control. This is keeping control of the narrative, making sure people look to them for the source of information so that they can manipulate you all for their next trick. That theory, which was broached in early spring 2020, was dismissed outright as harebrained, wacky idea, primarily, it seems, due to the fact that then President Donald Trump mentioned that he thought it might be a possibility. That's the truth. Donald Trump mentioned it. Donald Trump had to be kicked out of power, so they had to ridicule Donald Trump as a conspiracy theorist, and in order to do that, they had to dismiss all research and suppress all investigation into the Wuhan lab source from the gain-of-function research. Think about this, folks. These people, these politicians, these elite who control the media are willing to destroy millions of people to preserve their power. They're willing to risk millions of lives to preserve their power. We should have had herd immunity last summer, fully. This virus should have gone extinct before the end of last summer if they had followed common knowledge epidemiologist advice. We would have had natural herd immunity. But they did not want that. That does not put billions and billions of dollars of your money into their pockets. That's what's going on. And the Wall Street Journal is part of it. Reading from the top, part of it in the sense that it's just a media company. They sat on that. Where are their brilliant investigators? Where are their brilliant journalists? Why were they all so silent? Are they all a group of idiots that can't open their own eyes and they can't have one independent thought amongst all of them? No. The Wall Street Journal itself sat on this story for a year and 2 months. Why? Follow the money. It's always follow the money. The Wall Street Journal is as guilty as any of them. Reading from the top. But they're trying to present themselves as the source fountain of truth now. Don't buy it. The State Department, under then Secretary Mike Pompeo, undertook an investigation into the origins of the virus. This investigation was spiked by the Biden administration. In hearings on Wednesday, Senator John Kennedy asked officials why that investigation was halted abruptly, but no answer was forthcoming. Dr. Anthony Fauci and others said that they didn't know it was ended until they read about it in the press. I don't believe that either. Biden has been saying throughout this thing that this virus came from natural sources, and he was even supporting that it came from the wet market up the street from where they just happened to be researching those very deadly same viruses of the coronavirus. No, it came from the wet lab by some coincidence. It gets worse. The story gets worse, folks. The Biden White House has now implemented its own investigation into the potential lab leak origins of COVID-19. Now that the Trump administration isn't behind the claim, social media, mainstream media, and Democrats are finding it impossible to ignore the potentiality anymore. Look at how the importance of their power in politics is so much more important than your health and life. They did not have one single thought about the health and welfare of the millions of Americans, hundreds of millions of Americans, and billions of people around the world. That was not in their mind. This is clearly obvious. Only after the Trump administration isn't behind the claim. Were they willing to even consider the possibility? That says everything, folks. That says everything. All of them. They should be hung to dry. They should be kicked out of office. They should be run out of the country. This is the biggest crime in human history by any measure. The biggest crime in human history. It's the biggest crime against humanity in human history. And I hate to say this and admit it, but these sick criminals are going to get away with it. They're going to get away with it. That's the sad truth. And the sad truth is that their power has not stopped growing. We have not, the infection that these people represent in the human race, in humanity, is a boil. It's a sick infection, and it's still growing. It has not reached its peak. So let's carry on here. This tweet I put out a couple days ago. I fully 100% believe it. I've never seen a case made or required for lockdowns, for these emergency powers that the governments have taken around the world. They just took them. They took them because the elite, wealthy, powerful elite, told them to lock down and take emergency powers. If you have a link to an argument, a rational, reasonable case made for lockdowns, send it to me, because I've never seen one. And I've never even seen politicians stand up and say, give me your case, prove that the lockdowns are needed and will work. Nobody stood up for it. They were implemented solely on the basis and response to lobbying by the elite, which included the provision that they remain in place until the world is vaccinated. The elite got much richer off the backs of the regular people. It is Bill Gates, Fauci, and his crowd who insisted that you must lock down the world until you take and buy our vaccine. This is no different than mafia protection money. We're closing your business until you give us 10% of everything you take in. Then you can open up your business. They did it. These are criminals, the whole lot of them. And this is a crime against humanity. Let's read on. Here's where I got some guy here tweeting about the same topic I mentioned just a minute ago. Workers of the world lost $3.7 trillion in the pandemic. Billionaires in the world gained $3.9 trillion. Tell me that isn't a motive to lobby governments to lock you down until you take the vaccine. Tell me that's not the biggest motive you've ever seen. Tell me that isn't protection money. Tell me that is not kidnapping in a sense. Or not bribery, but extortion. It's extortion. We've been extorted in the biggest crime against humanity in human history. It's the biggest one-year wealth transfer in history, yet somehow barely anyone is talking about it. That's true. You know, there was an old saying, if you tell a small lie, everybody will call you out on it. But you have to tell a lie big enough and people will buy it. This pandemic is the biggest con, the biggest crime in human history. 9 execs from these companies so far profited from the virus that killed 3.4 million people as their individual wealth soared past the $1 billion mark. These are the captains, so they're the sergeants of the elite. They're going out and they're all making huge monies because they're pulling the strings to get all these vaccines out there and getting their big cut off it. I won't reread this again. No case was ever made for these lockdowns, and no case was required for these emergency powers. This in itself is a crime. Here, 24th of May, 2021. Future virus more deadly than COVID-19 will spark new pandemic, WHO chief warns. Why is he still the chief of the World Health Organization anyways? He's in the pockets of the Chinese. He's got connections to nefarious characters from Ethiopia when he was a big dude there. And they're already trying to set the public up for the next round of rob the regular guy. These are the organized criminals of the world. They make the mafia look like amateurs. Here, this came off of Twitter. Anthony Fauci, this is in May 5th, 2020. Anthony Fauci just crushed Donald Trump's theory on the origins of the coronavirus. This is when Donald Trump was suggesting it came from that Wuhan lab. Fauci poo-pooed it. Why did he? He's an epidemiologist. He's a virologist. He knows that it could have come from that lab. He knows fully well that that was probably the leading theory. But he crushed it because the Democrats told him to crush it. The Democrats are his boss. The elites. All of the super wealthy elites are leftists. They're Democrats. We've gone into why that is in the Becoming One More Government and Feminism's role in the One World Government. Have a look at that video if you want to know why the elite are all leftists. The super wealthy elite don't need capitalism anymore. They've climbed that ladder. They're up and above capitalism now. They want to pull that ladder up. They don't want more competitors in a capitalist world. Keeping the ladder there for other people with energy and drive to do better for themselves just means more competition for them in the future and the possible loss of their status in that community. Their interests lie in pulling the ladder up, destroying capitalism, creating the socialist world, and in the socialist world, those who run the system have everything. Absolutely everything. Those elite who got there by capitalism, they will be the elite of the socialist world, and there will be no more ladders for other ambitious men to climb. They'll be crushed down into the work slave class. And here, this is 1 year later, Fauci is asked, are you still confident that it developed naturally? Sanders questioned the NIH, National Institute of Agency and Infectious Diseases director, which is Fauci. No, actually. He's not so confident now. Why? Because that old narrative has served its purpose already. They can throw China under the bus now. They're buddies. They've served their purpose. Reading from the top, U.S. intelligence authorities have recognized that the intel community has two theories of the origins of COVID-19. Two agencies believe that coronavirus surfaced naturally due to human contact with infected animals, while a third agency is embracing a possible laboratory accident as the source of the global pandemic. Not just laboratory accident, as it turns out. This is not any ordinary laboratory accident. It's looking that this was an accident, possibly accidental relief of a human-modified, researchers modified coronavirus. Modified specifically for gain of function so that it transmits, it spreads and infects more easily in the human population. It was deliberately modified to be more infectious to humans. This, again, is the biggest crime against humanity in human history. This is the biggest crime against humanity ever. CNN says the COVID-19 origin story has massive political consequences now, May 27th. It's hard to say whether they can't contain the story or they are getting ahead of the game to pretend like they are the ones breaking the story. I think that's how they're trying to sell this. CNN and all their crowd, they're getting ahead of this story so that they can try to present themselves to the public as the courageous journalists who are breaking the story. They're not breaking this story. They suppressed this story for a year and 2 months, long enough for the goals they had in mind to be accomplished. Now they're going to present themselves as breaking the story, and then they're going to say, look how well you can trust us. We blew the lid off this story. Don't buy it, folks. These people are infinitely tricky. Infinitely tricky. Read from the top. Here are some of the significant developments. Crime on China on Thursday criticized the Biden administration for its renewed push to investigate the origins of the coronavirus. President Joe Biden on Wednesday told Americans he had ordered U.S. intelligence agencies to report in 90 days on whether the virus originated not in animals and spread to humans, but might have escaped from a Chinese laboratory. Stuff that we knew about. Let me ask you this. If a presidential candidate didn't know this, and all of us talked about it 14 months ago, is he and his team, are they qualified to handle it from here? No. They can't claim not to have known this before. The Biden administration crushed that investigation before. They're manipulating us through and through every minute and every second of this pandemic. Read from the top. The move deepened a mystery encompassing the pernicious spread of a deadly pathogen, an intricate epidemiological puzzle, the opacity of a totalitarian system, and the bitter overtones of a superpower rivalry. Well, the opacity of a totalitarian system. I don't know if they are talking about China or the U.S. or Canada, or if there's really that much of a difference. They're all treating us like guinea pig rats, like work slaves. Let's read on. It will fan doubts about the World Health Organization's capacity to tease out lessons from the current crisis in order to prevent future pandemics. Fan doubts, as if anybody should have any credibility, place any credibility in the WHO anymore. If it turns out the virus did escape from a laboratory, former President Donald Trump may be able to claim some vindication. But it would also highlight how his repeated habit of trashing the truth and bending intelligence to suit his own political ends shattered his credibility on this and other issues. Notice how quickly, I'm telling you folks, don't underestimate the tricky, manipulative nature of these people who run CNN and the news organizations on the left. In one sentence to the next, they admitted that Trump might be true, and they right away found a way to smear him as being the cause of the misinformation, the cause of the deception. They're implying that Trump's habit of trashing the truth, a habit that has not been demonstrated. He has not been a habit of trashing the truth. He has a habit of saying truths that you don't like. That's what they mean by trashing the truth. But notice how they imply here that somehow something Donald Trump said or did is why we're in the trouble we're in today. You know, this is like saying, oh, well, if she only did everything he said, then he wouldn't have had to hit her. You know, you're placing blame on the victim here. This is a complete table turner. They didn't believe Donald Trump. It wasn't because of his habit of trashing the truth. It was because they wanted him out of power. Pure and simple. And they were willing to put all of the American people at risk by hiding the truth, by pushing forward the lockdowns and insisting on the vaccines going forward. They were willing to put the lives of everyone in the world at risk for pursuit of their political power. That's the leftists. That's the CNN. That's the Wall Street Journal. That's all of these organizations. They're all owned by the same people. And they're not going to give up their status as billionaires. The focus on the laboratory, reading from the top, theory, in recent days multiplied calls in Washington for the U.S. to make China pay a price for the pandemics, even before the full extent of its origins are known, adding more toxicity to a political joust that may spark a new Cold War. If it's the truth, it's the truth. Get on with it. Stop being a fearmonger here. Who cares whether it's adding toxicity to a political joust? A geopolitical joust is a frickin' war. Deal with it. Get on with the truth. But these journalists today have nothing to do with the truth. They're not interested in the truth. They're interested in carrying on the bidding of their paymasters. Reading from the top. But finding answers will be hard. China has every reason to cover up a virus that stained its prestige as a rising and sophisticated superpower with nearly 3.5 million people dead worldwide. Its nationalist leader Xi Jinping and the Communist Party have no time for shame or culpability that would mar their core case to the world, that their one-party rule is a better fit for the 21st century than democracy, a narrative Biden has publicly vowed to combat. All just smoke and mirrors, folks. Smoke and mirrors. Reading from the top. Facing his own political pressure, Biden laid out two theories that seen as likely by U.S. intelligence agencies. The first has long been regarded by the most credible. That's by public health experts. No, there is no consensus of that by public health experts. Only those who are in the pockets of the elite. That there was a zoonotic spread, possibly from live animals in a wet market in the Chinese city of Wuhan. Okay, every time this comes up, I've got to get this off my chest again. That Wuhan wet lab, where they sell wet meat, whatever, wild meat, up the street from the lab where they're doing gain-of-function research into those very viruses. What are the chances of all the wet markets, I should say, in China, that this particular virus escaped in that wet market, not in one of the 300,000 other wet markets in China, or the hundreds of thousands of wet markets in the world, in Africa and other parts of the world? No, it just that particular wet market release had to come from a wet market down the street from where they're researching those very viruses. Come on, folks. They take us for dumber than dumb. That's the leading theory? Come on. If that's the leading theory, then we've got a bigger problem with the dumbing down of the education system. We're pumping out idiots from our universities, which is true, either way this goes. Let's read on. Biden's notable public statement came as he felt rising political heat after the Wall Street Journal revealed that several Chinese virologists sought hospital treatment late last year for an unidentified ailment. CNN then reported that the Biden administration had shut down a probe launched in the waning days of the Trump State Department to prove COVID-19 came from a Chinese lab. While the State Department later said the inquiry had simply been completed, several sources involved who spoke to CNN said it was their impression there was more work to be done. CNN is, like I said a minute ago, is just trying to get ahead of the game now that this story has to come out, and they want to present themselves as the courageous journalists breaking the story. Nonsense. They're just playing the next role of the script. The Biden administration is now facing calls to show it took the possibility of Chinese culpability sufficiently seriously, especially since prominent Trump team officials and Republicans are launching a victory lap after last year promoting claims about Wuhan lab, mostly without any clear evidence. Mostly without any clear evidence? Again, notice, folks, how seamlessly they try to throw the scrutiny on and the culpability onto the Trump administration instantly. What is worse here? The claim of mostly without any clear evidence is a nonsense, wishy-washy claim. It's like saying maybe this is true. Whereas the fact is that the Biden administration actually canceled the investigation. They took active action to hide, to prevent people from looking into the truth. Active action on multiple fronts. And yet, CNN, true to its taskmasters, true to its paymasters, are in the public's eye, and especially their readership, are going to say that dastardly Trump, he made accusations without clear evidence. And therefore, he's responsible for us not going down investigating that road. This is the manipulative, infinitely manipulative and sleazy nature of CNN and its compatriots, its fellow journalists. But Trump supporters also appear to be making another attempt to whitewash history of his disastrous handling of a pandemic that killed hundreds of thousands on his watch. Let's see why here. I guess I didn't copy that out. Let me tell you why. The states, individual states, have the autonomy over any kind of lockdowns and responses to the coronavirus in their jurisdiction. The Trump does not have federal jurisdiction to put lockdowns of any kind or restrictions due to this pandemic into individual states. And Fauci himself, in a quote we just talked about earlier in this very show, said he was disappointed that states weren't invoking more lockdowns. Fauci said that. He said that because the federal government does not have jurisdiction to force states to have lockdowns. And yet CNN is putting the blame on Trump. And CNN writers know full well that their readership is not going to know this. They're going to want to blame Trump. They're giving him their readers a reason to blame Trump, even though Trump did not have the power to do what they're suggesting he didn't do. He didn't do it because, one, it's not the right thing to do anyways, and two, he didn't even have the power to do it. But the CNN readership will not ever think that way. I don't think I read that last one, but let me try going back on this. No, this is not going to now let me go forward. It does this every time. Dr. Leanna Wen, a CNN medical analyst, former Baltimore health commissioner, said on CNN Newsroom that such a probe needed to be based on a scientific method, which means you don't go into this with a preferred conclusion and then cherry pick your data to fit that conclusion. They're implying that that's what Trump was going to do. There is no reason for that belief. There's never been a shred of evidence to suggest that the Trump administration investigation was going to cherry pick anything. But CNN is suggesting that that was what they were going to do and is giving themselves and the Democrats in the newsrooms an out. They're absolving themselves of responsibility, claiming again, because Trump was going to cherry pick, we didn't go down that road either. These are the purely manipulative liars we are dealing with here. I don't know why this thing is not letting me go out of here. Go forward. Okay, here we go. Such concerns are why the Biden administration closed down the probe opened by ex-Secretary of State Mike Pompeo. Two sources told CNN's Kylie Atwood. Notice at every single turn, they're trying to make it appear that it is Trump's fault. Biden administration didn't want the Trump administration to cherry pick a conclusion. Therefore, they'll just stop looking into the one that if true, or the one that they knew was true, was going to screw up their plans for vaccinating the world and becoming super duper rich off of it. Yeah. Why is CNN not talking about that particular possibility? Why? Because their paymasters don't want them to. Let me go forward here. I have to open up another one because this system is locked up on me there. It's not opening up. Bear with me. Okay, here we go. The Trump administration, facing election year blame for its botched handling of a pandemic the ex-president long downplayed, had a strong incentive to find Chinese negligence, whatever the real story was. It also had a record of shaping science and intelligence for political ends and rejecting inconvenient expertise. More lies. Outright lies. This is just, again, the left absolving themselves of responsibility. This is them blaming Trump for what they're actually doing. It was the election year, and their desire to get Trump out of it is why all the deceit of this pandemic went on in the first place. It is why they did not allow herd immunity to naturally form. It is why they insisted on lockdowns to try and destroy Trump's success at rebuilding the economy and undermine his election possibilities. These are the biggest criminals in human history. There's no two ways about it. I'm going to pause here for a second and acknowledge Sean. Hi, Steve. Just to piss off the insane local in my area who put masks on all statues, I ripped them off. People just look and say nothing, as I am not a small guy. Good for you, Sean. Masks on statues? I mean, thank you again. Thank you so much for your support of Studio Brûlée, Sean. Much, much appreciated. And I like your comment. I didn't know that anyone was stupid enough and indoctrinated enough to put masks on statues. This whole mask thing is out of hand. It's really ridiculous. Now let's read from the top here. It now falls to the Biden administration to prove that it has the clout and willingness to track down the rich. Look at the gall these people have. Trump was looking into this. They accuse him of cherry-picking a result. They force his investigation to shut down. Then they come and write a statement like this. They are so clever. If you read the article, you'll see how conveniently they weave a Biden and Democrat hero out of all of this. It now falls to the Biden administration to prove that it has the clout and willingness to track down the origin of the virus. They spent a year preventing any track down on the origin. They spent a year promoting Antifa and BLM, riots and burning and looting in the country. These are the same people. Let's read on. There will be questions whether intelligence agencies, given the notorious difficulty of penetrating the Chinese security state, represent the best way of finding the truth. It is not yet clear whether China fully understands the origin of the virus. Oh boy. They're trying to help their friends from China appear to be equally victimized by Trump. That they don't understand the origin of the virus. Only Trump, the meanness of Trump, was trying to cherry pick and pin it on them. Even the Chinese themselves don't understand the origin of the virus. Just trying to clean everybody on your side up, aren't you, CNN? And the starting points of the pandemics can be difficult to pinpoint. There's looking like some pretty frickin' strong evidence right now. Reading from the top. Many of us feel that it is more likely that this is a natural occurrence, where it goes from an animal reservoir to a human, but we don't know 100% the answer to that, says Fauci. The government's top infectious diseases experts said at a White House COVID-19 briefing testing. Fauci, he's the guy who authorized millions of dollars of money sent to the Wuhan lab. He knows exactly what's going on in that lab. He knows that they were modifying doing gain of function research on those very coronaviruses. And he wants to tell us that he believes that it just coincidentally released from a market up the road. Of all the hundreds of thousands or millions of wet markets in the world, the virus was smart enough to release, to jump into the human population right down the road from where they're researching that same virus. Because, the virus wanted Trump. It was playing a trick on Trump to get him out of office, right? I mean, that's about as that's about as believable as that the Chinese don't know, and that this came from a natural animal reservoir. The top infectious disease expert. And he doesn't ever elaborate on the statistical probability of the research being done in that lab and the virus coming out up the street. Doesn't that? Sure, it's a coincidence. Yeah, but it's happened and it's there. What's your reasoning by not wanting to research, not wanting to investigate that lab? Are you protecting it because of your connections? Maybe Fauci's sending of millions of dollars to the Wuhan lab is only a drop in the bucket of his culpability. Maybe Fauci is afraid that if the investigation goes down that road, much worse things are going to come to light. Much, much worse. That is a more likely, a more believable hypothesis than an animal reservoir. Let's read from the top here. But the Biden White House does have some political exposure on the issue. Last year, Democrats rebuked Trump for pulling out of the WHO on the grounds that it was dominated by China. And that's a good reason. The U.S. rejoined the global body soon after the new president took office. If it turns out Beijing hoodwinked the WHO, which downplayed the laboratory theory, senior Trump officials can claim some vindication. Look, Beijing didn't hoodwink the WHO. They're already trying to protect the WHO in this. This is CNN. There's not very much journalism going on here. This is rationalizing and protecting your paymasters. The Beijing, the China, is China who got Tedros into the leadership role at the WHO. They didn't hoodwink them. They're in bed together. Andy Slavitt, reading from the top. The White House's COVID-19 coordinator said on Tuesday that the U.S. needed a completely transparent process from China. We need the WHO to assist in that matter. We don't feel like we have that now, and you're not going to get it. The WHO had an investigation. They held them off for a year to go in there, and then they wouldn't let them even go into the lab and look at the data and the records. That's how much they're going to hide it. They had an investigation. The investigators came out and they told the very same story that they were told to tell before going in. The same story that Fauci's trying to say is the leading candidate for the source of this virus, that it's from an animal reservoir. China then even tried to claim that the animal source was from meat from Australia. More politics they were playing there. Let's read from the top. His comments raise the question of whether the WHO, in its current configuration, has the diplomatic weight and capacity to conduct an investigation that China is likely to obstruct. The World Health Organization is not capable of undertaking this investigation because, frankly, the Chinese won't allow it, said Republican Senator Marco Rubio. He's right, but the WHO is not going to press hard because Tedros, his boss, is China. Jeez. We need to know, reading from the top, what happened here. The Chinese Communist Party knows what happened here, exactly. They know who patient zero was. They know precisely where this began, Pompeo said on Fox News on Tuesday, and I believe that too. Pompeo is asking reasonable questions, even if he has political motives. The Chinese government was tardy in warning the rest of the world of the tragedy that was unfolding in Wuhan. And the WHO appears to have struggled to secure timely and detailed answers about what was going on in late 2019 and early 2020 as the virus erupted. I think, I've said my memory is weak on this one, but I think we looked into that a little bit at the beginning of this thing. And that Tedros and the WHO, they were withholding information about what they knew was going on in China at that time. This idea that CNN is floating here, that the WHO is somehow being obstructed by China, is protecting the WHO, protecting their whole game here. The WHO is not being manipulated by China. The two are in bed together. Let's read from the top. I don't see any other way for the World Health Organization to restore its credibility in the eyes of Americans, and there are many across the world who have seen them, frankly, place more trust in the Chinese Communist Party leadership, more deference to them than they have to the Western world. That's true. Or to their mission, which is to the World Health Organization, health of the world. No, the World Health Organization is a front for Chinese interests in the world. That's the problem. They have been bought by the Chinese. Tedros is only there because the Chinese government put him there. They lobbied through the United Nations to have him put there. I'm going to pause here for a second. Optimus Kime, thank you so much for your support of Studio Brûlé. Excellent stream other day with Janice. Thank you so much, Optimus Kime. Janice will be on again in 2 weeks from that last show. So stay tuned, get yourself subscribed, like, and reminder button. All those 3 buttons that YouTube makes us click now. It used to be 1 button, now it's 3. Let's read onwards here. Trump himself gave the impression back in May 2020 that he had some information about the origin of the virus, saying something happened. It came from China. It should have been stopped. It could have been stopped on the spot, Trump said. The ex-president, however, frequently touted conspiracy theories, hunches, and manipulated intelligence and facts to serve his own political argument. He also politicized the virus for his own ends. So he was not seen as a particularly credible source. That's crap. Notice that when places like CNN throw this out, they never put an example in here. In any of their accusations of Trump, they didn't put an example in. They just say he frequently touted conspiracy theories, hunches, and manipulated intelligence. What? When? On what? They say that his conspiracy theory was that the virus came from the Wuhan lab. It's turning out that's not a conspiracy theory. He is right. But they don't give other examples. They just make this broad claim. This is an attack on the person and not on the ideas. And then they want to make sure that, then they want to claim that it's Trump's fault, therefore, that we're in this position today, which it is not. Whatever COVID-19's origin, history will condemn Trump for his neglect and denial once it reached U.S. soils. No. He actually hampered U.S. preparedness early in the crisis because he failed to pressure Beijing for answers. His team was investigating the Wuhan lab as the source of the virus. The Biden team shut it down. And you're going to say that Trump failed to pressure Beijing for answers? Seriously? CNN is not journalism. Let's not pretend it's journalism. They're left-wing run propaganda site. And how did he hamper U.S. preparedness early in the crisis? Trump secured his project, I forget the name of it. Somebody can tell me in the comments. Light speed or something like this, I can't remember. But they secured the largest and best supply of vaccines that the public wanted. The Trump administration got that secured, not the Biden administration. So what preparedness did he not get? The states, as I mentioned before, are the jurisdiction over whether they lock down their states or not. And as we've noticed with other expert epidemiologists, the correct strategy was, in fact, to let life go on as normal and protect the elderly and those at risk, which is more or less what Trump tried to do, is let things go on as normal within the power of his jurisdiction. Again, he could not order states to either lock down or stay open. That was up to each individual governor. But CNN is going to whitewash over that fact. And I just thank you there, John B., for your kind encouragement. John says, Steve is the voice of reason. We need more people like him. Thank you, John. So here we get back to the Wall Street Journal now. Intelligence on sick staff at Wuhan lab fuels debate on COVID-19. Let me just see how much more I've got here. I know there's a lot of stuff. I might not be able to get, whoa, yeah, there's a lot more stuff. Okay. Folks, I think this is over an hour and a quarter now. I'm going to have to continue this stream tomorrow because some of the best stuff is coming later, but if I get through, keep going on like this, We're all going to be very tired before I get to the really important stuff here to wrap this up with a punch as to where this is really going and what it really means, all of this changes here. So having said that, this is where we'll pick it up tomorrow on the next coffee session. So thank you once again for joining me on Coffee with Steve. I barely drank my coffee today. So I like to remind everybody at the end of every session, do something you love to do today. Do it every day. If you don't have something you love to do, find something. This is really important. That simple behavior got me through some of the worst periods of my life. No question about it. Find something you really love to do. Put your heart into it and do it every single day for at least some part of that day. So with that, I hope you join me again for the second part of this now that Trump is gone, they can let the truth come out session, because you're going to like the wrap up to this. So until tomorrow, take care and do something you love to do.